Some more testimony there from key witness Danny Joe Carter in the Tex McIver murder case out of the Atlanta, Georgia area. Tex McIver was a prominent attorney in Atlanta when he was accused of intentionally shooting and killing his wife, who was a front seat passenger in an SUV. McIver was in the back seat. His wife was seated in front of him. That witness, Danny Joe Carter, was behind the wheel when the SUV stopped at a stop sign or a traffic light. And Tex McIver says the gun he had in his lap for protection went off accidentally, meaning his hand was on it, his finger was on the trigger, but he didn't intentionally pull the trigger. He said he was startled awake, and in that process, that's when the gun went off. Andell Brown is an attorney who joins us regularly here on the Law and Crime Network, but it's been a little while since I've seen you, Andell, so it's good to see you again.
It's great to be back, Aaron.
Okay, I know you've been keeping yourself busy, but let's break this Danny Joe Carter stuff down a little bit more here. You see, the prosecutor there in the direct examination start to kind of key into what's going on with the masseuse, and Tex McIver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm wondering.
I mean, the prosecution, they're really getting into the details of that, and the importance of it, I guess, is yet to be revealed, but they're really asking a lot of questions about it, and I was interested to see what Danny Joe Carter was going to get into as far as the masseuse was concerned.
They really put the brakes on that, and it resulted in some pretty nasty closing arguments here. This insinuation that Tex McIver had something going on with this masseuse. The masseuse gets on the stand later and is like, pretty much says, that's gross. There's nothing going on like that. But they were trying to needle at this from almost every possible perspective. Let's go back to more testimony from Danny Joe Carter now. This trial could be said to be almost all about money. Questions there about whether or not this couple, which kept separate finances, would be able to properly settle the estate of victim Diane McIver. Andell Brown, what do you think? I mean, is a will, is the possibility of a newer will that rumoredly was never found enough for the state to prove this was an intentional murder?
Well, I think one of the things the state has the burden of proving here is that there is some reason why Tex McIver would want his wife dead. And I think the money issues that Tex McIver was having, as well as the fact that they had separate finances and that his wife had much.
Andell, sorry about that. The signal got a little bit funky there. We're going to try to bring the sound back in full here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to take a quick break first here on the Law and Crime Network. We'll be back in just a moment with more discussion and more testimony, including the cross-examination of Danny Joe Carter, the key witness. But that's when we come back in just a moment here on Law and Crime. Welcome back to Law and Crime, folks. Just before the break, I was talking to Andell Brown about whether or not this state presumption that Tex McIver wanted his wife dead to get at her money. He was trying to get at what was in her will. He was trying to control her property. Whether that was a good theory, Andell, I know we couldn't hear you for a split second, so I'll give you a chance to finish your thought.
Certainly, Aaron. I think that has been a central theme of the state, and I think it absolutely matters because the difference between a tragic accident and cold-blooded murder in this case is motive. And they have laid out their case to state that Tex McIver was trying to live the high life, but he couldn't afford it. He and his wife had separate finances. She had the money. If she got out of the way, he could get to the money. That's their theory. That's what they're going after, and that's why they're focusing on these details.
Look, we're going to go straight into the cross-examination now of Danny Joe Carter. She was on the witness for quite some time, a couple of days. She's one of the key witnesses. She was in the car when the shots rang out. Her cross-examination is critical. Let's begin there now. That was some of the cross-examination of key witness Danny Joe Carter in the Tex McIver murder case of Atlanta, Georgia. Attorney Tex McIver accused of shooting and killing his CEO wife, Diane McIver, when the two were on their way back home from a day at their ranch and then dinner out in the Atlanta area. They went off the highway because of a traffic backup. Tex McIver thought that he was in a dangerous area. He asked for his gun. His wife handed it to him. He says he dozed off in the back seat with his hands on the weapon, and that when the vehicle stopped, he was startled awake, and that the gun went off in the process. He says he had his hands on it. The gun didn't just spontaneously go off, but somewhere in the process of waking up, that motion is what caused the trigger to go off. Is it a believable story? Andell Brown is a criminal defense attorney. He joins us frequently here on the Law and Crime Network, and he's with us today. Andell, what do you think? Do you think this is a plausible story, or do you think it's hogwash?
I think the devil is in the details here, Aaron. We have Tex McIver, who is an avid gun enthusiast. He would have people over to the ranches, and he would do sort of shooting displays. He could shoot plastic water bottles out of the air and other things. So he's very experienced with guns. It's very unlikely that someone with that level of experience is going to have a gun in a position where it accidentally goes off. And I think the other thing that we have to look at in this case when we judge Tex McIver's credibility is whether his story has been consistent. There are some inconsistencies in the account. At first, there was a bump that caused the shot to go off, but later on it changed when that story wasn't supported by the evidence, and it said, you know, I was asleep, I was startled awake, and somehow the gun went off accidentally. So I think his credibility isn't as high as it
so many details in this case, Andell. But look, we need to take another quick break here on Law and Crime. We'll be back with more of that cross-examination of Danny Jo Carter when we return in just a moment. Again, this is the Tex McIver case from Georgia. More cross-examination there of key witness Danny Jo Carter. Andell Brown is a criminal defense attorney. He's with us here on the Law and Crime Network. Andell, what do you make of this part of the cross-examination? They keep slicing and dicing these issues so fine that it's sort of getting hard to see the forest for the trees.
Right, but Aaron, I think Tex McIver's lawyer is very skillfully trying to weave into the cross-examination testimony the fact that another person that they knew, part of their conversation, had an accidental discharge of a firearm in their home. And I think what he's trying to do there is impress upon the jury that this is something that can happen to anyone, and that it is more than likely an accident that happened to Tex McIver on that evening, because after all, that is their theory of defense.
You know, look, the one part of this trial that sticks out in my mind, and we keep going back to it over and over again, is when the state had the weapon up on the stand and the state's expert accidentally triggered it.
Right. That definitely wasn't the finest moment for the state or their case.
No, it wasn't. But look, I can certainly understand the defense wanting to really slice and dice these issues. You know, again, one of the accusations is that Danny Jo Carter allegedly was asked to lie about this from the defendant himself. But was she really asked to lie, or was it a miscommunication? Was he simply asking her questions? That's what he does. He's an attorney. You like to ask people questions. I like to ask people questions. I don't know how I would react if I was in a traumatic situation. If it involves someone close to me like this, I might want to just keep asking questions. Look, jurors have a lot to wade through in this case. We're going to be back here on the Law and Crime Network with more of the cross-examination of Danny Jo Carter when we return after a quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back. More cross-examination there of key witness Danny Jo Carter in the Tex McIver murder case from Atlanta, Georgia. The case of an area attorney accused of shooting and killing his CEO wife. Andell Brown is a criminal defense attorney joining us here on the Law and Crime Network. So there, Andell, we again see this honing in on whether or not this was a deliberate attempt by the defendant to try to get this witness to lie. What did you make of the cross-examination there? Was it focusing on too narrow of a sliver of this witness's memory, or was it taking it in with the rest of the totality of what was said ethically?
It seemed that Tex McIver's attorney was trying to get Danny Jo Carter to admit that what she was saying, what she alleged Tex McIver said to her, wouldn't have made sense in the context of all the things that were going on. She drove up to the hospital. She gave the keys to the valet. She's on tape. There's surveillance there at the hospital. Why would he say something like that? It's totally ridiculous. And I think that's what Tex McIver's defense counsel is driving at, and they're trying to bring out of her testimony with the cross-examination.
That's what it seems like to me, too. But, you know, it's like you've got this statement that, well, no, I'm not asking you to lie. But then he said to her, according to the testimony, you need to say you came here as a family friend. And it's like those two don't seem to line up in my mind, at least not in an ethical version of this that I can put together.
Right. If those statements are made, they don't line up ethically, Aaron. And that's because it seems as if he's trying to get her to change the story from what actually happened to something else. perhaps, from the prosecution standpoint, so he can manipulate the story, and Danny Joe Carter's version does not go to the authorities.
Yeah, this part gets really, really tricky to try to make sense of here. Look, difficult case. The jury had a lot to wade through in this case. We're going to be back with more from the Tex McIver case here on the Law and Crime Network when we return from this quick break. All right, welcome back, folks. That was the tail end of our review of cross-examination of Danny Joe Carter in the Tex McIver murder case from Atlanta, Georgia. Andell Brown still on the line with me here at the Law and Crime Network. Andell, this may be one of the most belaboring cross-examinations that we've listened to, laborious, whatever we want to call it. They're just nitpicking these multiple interviews that this witness did. I get that she's a key witness, but taking one or two words here and then asking the relationship to one or two words over there and trying to make sense of it, it's kind of like, what's the big picture here?
Well, sometimes the difficulty with that, Aaron, is it makes it difficult for the jury to follow along with exactly what you're trying to tell them. But what it appears Tex McIver's counsel is doing in this instance, there's certain testimony that Danny Joe Carter gave that they like, and they're trying to get the jury to focus on that testimony. They're trying to make it seem as if that testimony is the most reliable testimony, it's the most accurate testimony. We saw Danny Joe Carter push back a little bit when the attorney tried to get her to lock her into that testimony that Tex McIver was asleep when all of this happened. And she says, I thought he was asleep because I felt as if Diane had woken him up. And she pushed back on when the attorney, it seemed, was trying to put words in her mouth. They like that testimony. They're trying to get the jury to focus on it, and that's what they want her testimony to reflect.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear, look, going into this, that she's friends with Diane McIver, the victim, not necessarily Tex. She was kind of friends with both of them, but, if she had to divide a loyalty, I think most people would say that it's probably with the victim. She was primarily friends with Diane McIver.
Absolutely.
And Diane's friends were not kind to Tex McIver. If you were defending Tex McIver, you're going into this knowing that this is probably going to be maybe not an outright hostile witness, but this is someone who wants to see your client punished.
Absolutely. Anytime someone passes away, it's a very emotional situation. People are going through grief and so many other emotions. It's totally natural to want to hold somebody accountable. And you always have to be aware of that as a defense attorney, that the friends and family are looking for someone to hold accountable. But your job is to make sure that you stick to the facts and the law, and you can show whether their testimony is reliable or unreliable in that instance.
Yeah, and sometimes, you have to kind of be able to point out, hey, look, this witness lost someone very dear to her. Maybe she does have a little bit of bias against the defendant here, and jurors, you can't let that color your opinion. Andell, we're going to wrap up for the day. Always great to see you. Again, folks, Andell Brown, criminal defense attorney, joining us on Law and Crime Network. Let's do this again some other time, Andell.
Always a pleasure, Aaron. I can't wait to be back.
Okay, well, we can't wait to see you again. So we're going to wrap up the broadcast day in just a minute, but a reminder, folks, that next week I will be in northern Kentucky in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, covering a high-profile case that's going to be a little bit tricky for us because the camera access rules are rather restrictive. This is the Shayna Huber's case, the case of a young woman accused of shooting her lawyer boyfriend in the face. A lot of people are going to be following this. We're going to keep you updated as best we can. But it's the end of the broadcast day here at Law and Crime. For everyone, this is Aaron Keller saying good evening. We'll see you back here Monday.